In one of the largest ever deal in aviation sector, Indigo has placed orders for 500 Airbus A320 aircraft worth $50 billion. The deal breaks past the previous record of Air India's Mega 470 aircraft order with Airbus and Boeing earlier this year. Now, according to the airline, it is the largest ever single aircraft purchase by any airline with Airbus. With this order, Indigo has become the world's biggest A320 Neo customer. The news comes on the back of DGCA, the aviation regulator, approving Indigo's international flights to certain destinations from Delhi along with Vistara. We are, of course, looking at the order book, which is primed to make Indigo one of the largest and biggest aviation players in India and perhaps also abroad. Joining me at this point in time is Bharat Kumar, who is an associate partner at Saikrishna Associates. Also with us is Ameya Joshi, who's an aviation expert. With me in the studio is my colleague Rakesh Khar. Gentlemen, appreciate you all taking time out. Rakesh, I want to quickly begin with understanding the contours of this deal. This is a mega news in the aviation space, which has been marred by a lot of controversy of late. The Indigo order book looking very huge, but the deliverables are over, I think, 10 years, a decade.
Well, good afternoon, Shweta. This again, puts spotlight on India. There is global spotlight on India, whether you like it or not. This
I like it. And there's nothing to not like.
I was talking about the naysayers.
Right.
This is a huge message to everyone and anyone who has an abiding interest in India, internally and externally, that India is the place to be.
Okay.
So when it comes to two largest airline companies in the world, that's Boeing and Airbus, where do they go in times of recession? It's India. So the biggest deal in 2023 came from Air India, which is about 470 aircraft. That was in February 23, and then this deal today, 500 aircraft. This is the largest single airline deal in aviation history, worldwide.
Oh, wonderful.
And let me just put it in context, Shweta, for you. Now, if you look at airline deals globally, I just did a little quick study, and I hope we're right on the numbers. Air India, 470 aircraft, 2023. Indigo, 500 aircraft, June 2023. And the last big deal happened again with Indigo, single largest airline. That was 2019, 300 aircraft. Before that, the largest deal, which is probably anywhere close to these numbers, is in 2011 by American Airlines. And then there is an airline which is basically representing interests of several airlines. It's called Indigo Partners, incidentally.
Okay.
So Indigo Partners, again, in 2021 and 2019 did 270 plus some odd airlines.
Okay.
So again, for the last post-COVID aviation scenario, it is India all the way.
Okay.
We have our own challenges internally in the domestic aviation market, which is ironic, which is sad actually, Shweta. At one level, the whole India has become the beacon of hope for global airline companies. At the same time, the reason for us not to be so excited is that because we have just 3 or 4 players in India who are actually on that trajectory.
Right.
So in that sense, all eyes on India, and rightfully so. This order, you asked about 10-year decade deal, generally orders of that size are expected to pan out. There's a pending order for Indigo with Airbus, which is yet to be completed, which will turn by the end of 2030.
Right.
So these announcements take a lot of time to materialize, and obviously a lot of financial.
Sheer magnitude of the order.
Sheer magnitude, the sentiment, and taking us back to the India story when Prime Minister is in US, and the earlier deal happened with Boeing. And I do understand that today, Indigo is also going to announce a deal with Boeing.
Okay. So that's in fact breaking news.
Yeah, I don't know it will be of that large size. Right now, Indigo only has 2 Boeing planes. They're leased from the Turkish Airlines. So, but now they're looking at none of these aircraft that they have ordered from Airbus, and most of their fleet is not what we call in aviation parlance wide-bodied aircrafts.
Right.
So I do understand that Indigo is looking at a 787 MAX Dreamliner to add to its kitty.
Okay.
Right now, Air India and SpiceJet are the 2 airlines that have that particular aircraft in India from Boeing.
Right. And if they are to take to international routes and establish themselves as a serious international player, having a wide body aircraft would perhaps be an added advantage. Also, this comes on the back of US being in news because Prime Minister Modi is in US.
Absolutely. So if the Boeing deals, I don't think it will be even half the number or maybe 1/4 of the number that we're looking at with Airbus. But it does indicate that, again, the point that I'm trying to make, two of the biggest airline companies in the world are looking at India.
Okay.
And it's a matter of pride that both these airlines are in the private sector. So we have privatized Air India the timing is hugely strategic in that sense. And I do understand even the latest airline that has joined us, Akasa Air, is also placing additional orders for Boeing. That announcement came incidentally yesterday itself.
Okay, so good news coming in there, at least for aircraft manufacturers who are looking at India as a major market. Ameya Joshi joining us at this point in time. Ameya, I want to quickly understand from you, what is the road ahead looking like for Indigo with this order? Obviously, the idea here is to push Indigo as a major international player at a time when there is increased competition in India but also abroad, but specifically here with and competing with Air India Vistara would not have been any easy, but to order as many as 500 aircraft, you've beaten that record as well.
Yes, so you have to look at India as a country in terms of numbers, right? We have all seen, right, from Captain Gopinath talking about how big the opportunity is. But if you look at the numbers over the last 2 decades, the domestic traffic in India is doubling every 10 years. So now if Indigo is holding somewhere between 50 to 60% market share with 300 odd aircraft, to have the similar number of market share 10 years from now, it would just need double the number of aircraft in its fleet. And that's what the airline is aiming at. So we're not looking at really eye-catching headlines here, but just to have 50% market share in 2033, Indigo would need 600 aircraft, and that is where it is heading. I think yesterday, Indigo CEO categorically said they are looking at doubling the fleet by the end of this decade, which is around 2030. Mind you, these numbers, close to 1,000 aircraft on order, are catering to replacements as well. So Indigo has one of the youngest fleets in the world in terms of average age, and that's what they're looking at. So not all of them are net additions. A lot of them help retire the older planes, ones which are in the fleet for 6 years, 9 years, 12 years. And that's how it helps in one way or another to keep the fleet young.
Okay. Bharat is also joining us. Bharat, the idea that Indigo is looking at 50% of the market share also comes on the back of the fact that Go First is currently off air, and you've been tracking story with respect to Go First. Obviously, revival plan is now being currently looked at by the committee of creditors, which will then be forwarded to the government. I want to, briefly maybe touch on Go First. What is the possibility of Go First coming back by the end of this month, and how's the proposal to come back looking like? How's it shaping up?
Hi, Shweta. First and foremost, I thank you so much for inviting me over. As I had mentioned it earlier, in fact, with GoFirst, now the thing is that an RP has been appointed, and the COC is completely taken over. To simplify these terms, as the viewers probably would not be aware of it, an RP is a person, he's a resolution professional. He's a person who takes care of the company and the company's interests in the absence. He's more or less a CEO for the time being. Now, the objective of the RP at this point of time is to make certain that the debtors, the deliverables of the debtors are met. Indigo, on the other hand, is but of course trying its level best to make sure that there be some type of an agreement with the debtors and they fly. If you will see, even if for the past close to about 15 days, they've been coming out with these announcements that they'll soon be flying and they'll soon be taking their aircrafts onto the air. I believe strongly that there could be some type of a settlement which comes through between the debtors and Indigo, and they should be flying.
Go First, you mean?
Yes, that's right. Go First.
Right. One thing that is common here, and perhaps is going to be common, is the Pratt & Whitney engine, which is what we briefly also touched upon in the morning. Bharat, I want to quickly understand from you. We know that Go First blamed its fate, the fact that it went down, went under, on unserviceable and the state of Pratt & Whitney engines in its aircraft. Now, a similar situation did not come up with Indigo just as yet, mainly on the back of the fact that Indigo has been able to churn out a better deal with Pratt & Whitney. But Pratt & Whitney, if it's the main culprit, it could be problematic even to Indigo at a future point in time. What prevents Indigo from slipping into the same future as Go First?
In fact, Shweta, you're absolutely right. And say about a couple of years ago, Indigo had issues with Pratt and Whitney engines, and then they changed these engines. In fact, a lot of these engines they stopped these contracts by what I gather, and they altered. We'll have to wait and see as to what type of an arrangement do they have when it comes to deliverables of these engines. I personally do not see Indigo relying solely on Pratt and Whitney. I see them going ahead with probably other engine manufacturers too. And that, in my humble opinion, that won't be extremely a very great thing to go ahead with solely Pratt and Whitney engines, considering what's happened with Go first.
Okay. Do you think Pratt and Whitney could be a problem for Indigo at any point in time,
The
Rakesh?
best way to deal with Pratt and Whitney, first of all, there's a bilateral commercial agreement between Go First and Pratt and Whitney,
that is
and
correct.
Indigo and Pratt and Whitney.
Right.
I'm not getting into the merits of that. You know, that's a bilateral, and if there are violations on either side when it comes to Go First, that has to be addressed accordingly.
Right.
But with the largest two deals that we have at hand, my recommendation to the government of India would be that get all the, engine makers in the world on one table and say that India is the largest market, as you have evidenced from the kind of orders we're getting. As of now, Indigo has openly stated that we have not made up our mind on what is the kind of engines we are buying. That part is still not been decided. So that gives a huge opportunity for government of India to actually,
Right.
to take control and get all the manufacturers on one table and say that if you have to, honor the commitments that we have made to these two manufacturers, you will have to act on the best terms and conditions suited to Indian players. So there, it's not about just Indigo or Air India or Go First. They are Indian carriers, and government of India is invested in, so to say, ensuring and safeguarding that we get the best engines at the best possible terms and conditions. So
And
in
so
that
far
sense,
there-
Indigo is right to keep it open.
Right.
And also, it's time to compliment Indigo because, it's a
Yes.
2006 story, 17 years. Can you imagine in 17
One of the
years,
youngest
one of the
aviation
youngest
players.
aviation companies, and in Indian aviation, unfortunately, have had a history of turbulence and, obituaries in the air, as I call it. In that sense, sustaining and growing in era of 2009 was recession, then again COVID happened, then in between also the economy slowed down. So in that sense, 17 years and 60% market share and hovering between 55 to 60% is remarkable. One has to compliment the airline for its capability to reimagine the Indian skies. But all this has to do with the India economic growth story. So both Airbus and Boeing, leadership at the topmost pinnacle, have stated that all this growth is possible linked to India's economic growth. That's where I want to reassert the importance of India as a dateline. What is happening is that the aviation market globally is growing at an average of 3.6%.
Right.
And if it is that many more countries in the Europe don't hit the recessionary, virus, and otherwise, China is growing at 5.3%. India is expected to grow continuously and is growing more than our GDP, which is 6%. So in that sense, right now we are the third or the fourth largest market. China, US, China, and UK. We're the fourth. On a certain day, maybe we fly more people.
Right.
But when it comes to our projections, by 2047, India is clearly destined to be the number one aviation market in the world.
Absolutely. So good news there overall for not just Indigo, but also for India. But I want to understand, Ameya, specifically from point of view of Indigo, how did Indigo manage this success? Often they say that the easiest way to become a millionaire from a billionaire is to open an airline or get into an airline business. Indigo there
Billionaire
seems
to millionaire, you said.
Billionaire to millionaire.
Yeah, that's
From a
right.
billionaire to millionaire. So if you want to half your wealth, get into aviation space. The fact that it's been able to avert those headwinds, those challenges, have been able to make profit is a big deal at a time when, as my colleague rightly pointed out, that we've seen airline after airline falling like a pack of dominoes. What has prevented Indigo from getting in same sort of rust and sustaining a growth momentum? What did they do right in your understanding?
I think it has got to do with the razor sharp focus which they have had over network, over tight control on the cost, and having real good deals with Airbus when it comes to aircraft induction as well as with engine manufacturers. So Pratt and Whitney, of course, you mentioned about Go Air going down and blaming Pratt and Whitney for the reason. Indigo started with Pratt and Whitney as its engine supplier on the A320 Neo and later shifted to CFM. So as I understand, They've already said their aircraft grounded, the number being in the upper 30s, but they've already switched over to a different manufacturer for their engines for the next lot. And that's what makes the difference. Go Air had that option, Go First, as they're now called. They stuck to Pratt and Whitney. Indigo already made amends and moved on, so they are not as impacted as Go First was. And these razor sharp things which keeps Indigo continuously looking for new areas to dominate, new routes to fly, make money, and continuously at the back of how can they push competition out and where is that opportunity to make money. So after 17 years, it still works like a startup on trying to get out at every opportunity, trying to corner competition at every possible way. And that is what has kept Indigo ahead of others when it comes to really being in this market where if at all there are profits, they were always as thin as a boarding pass. And otherwise it was all dominated by losses all across.
Okay, that's an interesting analogy, and perhaps that is where Go First did not make up. A lot of experts that we've had on the show have often said this, that you've got to blame Pratt and Whitney, but you've also got to partly blame the management for not having a watertight contract with Pratt and Whitney, and that is also one of the reasons why your aircrafts, when unserviceable, were not catered to swiftly. Perhaps the relationship, the contract that you've been able to negotiate was not good enough. Would you say somewhere that Go First management could have done a better job?
Well, difficult to tell without looking at any of the contracts. So I think not the best of
Right,
thing to comment on it.
right. Bharat?
Hi, Shweta. So I completely agree with you on these aspects. So I just want to add a little over here. Pratt and Whitney, in fact, had an arbitration with Go First, and Go First won that arbitration. There were two awards, that is, two judgments which were given. Uh, it's not that I won't say that the contract was completely foolproof, because I mean, in all honesty, it's not that all contracts are completely watertight. There's just a little here and there which is left. What is important is that they did win that arbitration, and despite that, Pratt and Whitney apparently and allegedly did not honor to that award which was passed. And that is what Go First says, is that this is what led to their collapse finally, and they had to file a voluntary winding up. But I'll add a little to, in fact, what my friend Rakesh Khar was mentioning about the growth, and with your permission, I'll just add a little on that. And if we look at the scenarios in which airlines at this point of time kind of flying out, SpiceJet apparently had, say, about a week ago, an application was filed against them by Air Castle. This was again for insolvency. Go First is in the midst of an insolvency. What I'm coming to is looking into the vast growth which we'll see now in the decades to come. In the next decade, I believe will be one of the biggest aviation markets in the world. There has to be like a better, I would say, a much. I strongly do believe that the Cape Town Convention has to be notified. In fact, that has to be ratified. This is a convention which India is signatory to. And if that comes through, that will give Lessors some bit of confidence that yes, we can invest in India. We can give them, we can lease aircrafts, and of course that will lead to further aircraft leasing and operations garnering further steam. That's what I feel.
And it's a fair point, the lessors have had an interesting turn of events for India. While aircraft makers are happy to see India as a buzzing market, if I were to say it like that, with lessors specifically, it's been tough. With Go First going under, lessors are now taking SpiceJet to court, hoping that they'll file for insolvency, if not voluntarily, because when it happened with Go First, lessors could not get their aircrafts back. All in all, they're eyeing India with some sort of mistrust. So it's difficult at this point in time for lessors to have faith and credibility in a market which can be very volatile, such as India.
I wouldn't take it to that level. I think, there are bilateral commercial agreements, and what happens is that if the P&L of that particular airline or that particular corporate entity starts bleeding or misbehaving, there's bound to be pressure on all kinds of agreements.
Right.
It's not just about lessors, they're all vendors. If you would see airlines that have gone down, all their vendors are in up in arms because there are payment issues. All this happens, to my mind, because there is not a very efficient P&L. The business case is not very strong.
Right.
This is here again why Indigo makes a special mention, because when, say for instance, Kingfisher came, it really, so to say, reimagined the Indian skies in a certain manner, because it talked about comfort with mobility. But what we have learned now very clearly, the Indigo model is something that we are all proud of, because Indigo model is this business is about transportation, transporting from point A to point B a passenger in time. It's not a business of luxury or comfort. It's a business of transportation, efficient transportation. So in that sense, the Indigo model, one of the key reasons that it has sustained its growth is that its on-air time is phenomenal, and they've stuck over the last 17 years on that particular track record. If you deviate from that model, and essentially what Indian aviation calls for is there is need for players with big and deep pockets. Let's not bring in players, with due respect to all the airlines that have gone down under. They didn't have deep pockets. So this business is not for the faint-hearted. This business is for very, very important people. And there's another big picture point that you mentioned about India being extremely, the airline companies being bullish about India. There is a challenge there as well, which we must not lose sight of. And as someone who's looking at very closely, we must say that while India is the hotspot when it comes to these airlines making a beeline here, China still continues to hold immense advantage, not in terms of the traffic growth or the big orders. What is significantly different between India and China is that China has enabled Airbus in particular. They have problems with Boeing because of India, because of Sino-US economic ties. But Airbus has just set up last December another assembly line to co-produce parts of aircraft in China with Airbus. So, if we're really bullish about getting these companies into India, the next best and the next most logical, step for Indian aviation is to host these airline companies in India and set up manufacturing bases here, so that part of the cost is getting mitigated. It leads to more jobs. Right now, the aviation sector contributes to about 5 to 6% of the India GDP. That has to significantly go up. One way to do that is to also encourage manufacturing in India. So, why do we always bring in these aircraft as it is to India? Why can't we manufacture them as side assembly like China has done with Airbus?
Right. Interesting point of view there. But before we move on, and obviously, being an Indian, very proud moment here for all of us in India. Indigo's mega order also means we'll have a larger focus of Airbus on India. Hopefully, we'll also set shop in terms of servicing, small units here, factories here. We'll be able to, focus a lot more on India as a market, and we will of course keep tracking that. But interestingly, before I move on, there's another piece of development that's come in as of last night, and that is DGCA now allowing Vistara and Indigo to fly on international routes. So let me quickly also bring in Ameya if he's with us at this point. Ameya, Indigo of course is hoping to fly in Asia. It's hoping to fly to certain parts in Africa. With the latest sort of approval by DGCA to fly to Bali, it appears that they want to break free of the domestic carrier image. They want to fly international, and all of that plans well for them, given that they have ordered a huge aircraft. There's a huge order here which will be made serviceable hopefully in next 10 years time, but even then they're preparing grounds to become an international carrier.
Yes, absolutely. And if you look at it over the years, they started expanding on international shores. The first one was towards the usual, Middle East and Southeast Asian markets, which have been very high volume ones. And over the last year and a half, they've been a little more, out of their comfort zone and trying out new routes, like routes to Vietnam, where nobody else had a direct flight in the past. And now again, routes to Indonesia, parts of Africa, Mauritius, and so on. For Indian carriers, Indigo as well as everyone, that's like coming of age routes which were only operated by foreign carriers. It's time for Indian carriers to step up. Indigo, of course, with a large market share, commands that kind of route network, where not only would you get passengers from just the place where you're starting this international flight, but with a huge route network across the country, you get a lot of feeder traffic as well. So potentially you could connect any passenger in one of the 78 destinations of Indigo domestically to its international network, one stop over the 4 or 6 major metros in the country from where they're expanding. And that is what is going to be the way forward, especially with the bilaterals, which are restricted across the world. How does Indigo take a step ahead of the Air India group? And this is the head start, because once Air India group starts getting their aircraft, they start the integration process. And once that is done, they would be looking at something similar. So this 1 to 3 year gap which Indigo has, it's the most important one for Indigo, so that they can have a head start over the Tata group of airlines.
So it's going to be a tough competition to compete with Tata and their deep pockets, of course. And the aviation regulator, I'm reading out from what's mentioned here, got an approval for Vistara to fly between Delhi and Bali from 1st of August. And Indigo has got an approval to fly between Delhi and Tbilisi in Georgia from August 7th. Now, this is, of course, a fresh sort of approval after it was already granted approval. Indigo was granted approval to operate a flight to Nairobi in Kenya from July 24th. So new serviceable routes there by Indigo and Vistara, hopefully trying to compete with each other. It's heading towards a duopoly. It's not there just as yet. You still have, small players. You still have Gophers trying to come back. All of that, of course, is work in motion. We will, of course, keep bringing you details as and when they emerge.